I used to believe that church was the safest place in the world, that inside those four walls, nothing bad could touch you, especially not him. They said Pastor Elroy was chosen by God. He baptized our babies, laid hands on the sick, married the young, and buried the old. And when I was 13, he chose me. He said I had a soft spirit, said I needed special guidance, said the Lord had a plan for my body, and he was just the messenger. It started with long prayers, then private meetings, then the darkness I kept for decades. Everyone else called him holy, but I knew the devil wore his cologne. I didn't speak then, but I'm speaking now, because after 70 years of silence, I'm ready to tell you what really happened behind the pulpit. My name is Mavis Louise Chapman. I'm 82 years old. I was born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina, in a wooden house my daddy built with his own hands, and my mama scrubbed clean every Sunday morning before church. We were the kind of family that never missed a service, not even in the rain. My father was a deacon. My mother led the prayer circle. And me? I was the quiet one, always listening, always watching. At 13, I had a soft voice and an even softer heart. Folks used to say I had angel eyes, the kind that made people want to protect you, but protection never came. I spent most of my life as a seamstress. Quiet work, careful hands. I married once, had a daughter, buried that daughter too soon, and for 70 years, I carried a truth no one dared to speak. Not about a stranger, not about a monster from the news, but about the man everyone in my town still calls Pastor. And now that my bones are old and my fear has thinned with time, I've decided to tell it all. Have you ever been afraid to speak because the person who hurt you wore a title people respected? This is for every woman who sat quietly in a pew while hiding her own truth. Comment your city below. Let Mavis know she's not the only one who carried silence for decades. Share your strength in the comments if you've ever been made to feel small by someone powerful. Like this video if her voice deserves to be heard. And subscribe for more true stories that were buried for too long. Now, it's time to listen. The first time Pastor Elroy spoke directly to me, I thought I had done something wrong. It was after Sunday service, late spring of 1954. The choir had just finished their final hymn, and the congregation was heading out, handshakes, hugs, and pie. Invitations humming in the air. I was standing near the back pew, straightening the hymnals like I always did. It was something Mama encouraged. "Keep your hands busy and your heart quiet," she used to say. He approached slowly, his Bible still tucked under his arm, sweat just beginning to dry on his collar. He smiled, not the wide, welcoming grin he gave the crowd, but something smaller, tighter. "You have a careful spirit, child," he said, "one that listens." I nodded, unsure if I should speak. He didn't wait for a response, just placed one hand on my shoulder, light but firm, and said, "Come help me close up the sanctuary." It didn't seem odd, not then. He was the pastor. He spoke to everyone. My mama beamed when she saw him near me. Daddy gave a respectful nod from across the room. Helping the pastor was a kind of honor in our church. I followed him to the front, past the pulpit, past the altar, into the side room where the choir robes were kept. The room smelled of starch and cedar. Light filtered through the stained glass window, painting the walls in deep purples and golds. He asked me to fold a few garments while he checked the offerings box. I said, "Yes, sir," and did as told. For a few minutes, we worked in silence. Then, as I reached for another robe, he said something I've never forgotten. "You know, the Lord speaks most clearly to those who aren't busy shouting." I looked up, unsure what he meant. "You don't need to be loud to be called," he continued. "Some girls think God only hears the ones who sing the loudest, but he sees the quiet ones, the obedient ones." He stepped closer. "And I see you too, Mavis." I froze. He smiled again. "You're special." At 13, I didn't know what to make of that. I just felt warm and strange inside. Not flattered, not scared, just confused. He never touched me that day, not in a way that anyone would question. But when I got home, I found myself looking in the mirror a little longer, wondering why he noticed me. That was the beginning, the first little thread he pulled from the sweater of my innocence. After that first Sunday, Pastor Elroy began noticing me more often. At first, it was in small ways, a nod from the pulpit when he made a point, a pat on the shoulder as I walked by, a whispered, "Stay sweet, child," at the end of service. But then the prayers started getting longer. Private. He told Mama that I had a spiritual gift, that I was tender to the word, and that I needed guidance, just like the prophets of old. Mama beamed. Daddy said, "Do what Pastor tells you." So every Wednesday evening, after Bible study, I stayed behind while the others left. He said we were making room for God. He'd shut the sanctuary doors and tell me to sit near the altar, just the two of us in that big, echoing space. He'd open his Bible and read passages I didn't understand, about submission, about obedience, about covering. Then he'd place his hand on my head and pray. At first, just that, his voice strong and deep, but soon his hand moved to my shoulder, then my back, then lower. He'd pause mid-prayer and ask me if I was feeling the Holy Spirit. I didn't know what to say. Sometimes I nodded, sometimes I just stared at the floor. He said the trembling in my hands meant I was anointed. He said the tightness in my chest was spiritual warfare. He said my silence was consent of the soul. I didn't understand those words, but I trusted him. Everyone did. And besides, who was I to question a man of God? One Wednesday, after prayer, he asked if I wanted to join the special volunteers. He said they were young women like me who served the church in private ways not everyone understood. He looked me in the eyes and said, "You're chosen, Mavis. Not all girls are built for this level of faith." I felt proud and scared, but mostly, I felt seen. At 13, being seen felt like love. He gave me a small gold pin with a dove on it, told me never to show it to anyone, said it was a symbol of our sacred connection. I pinned it under my blouse every Sunday. And every week, the prayers got longer, the touches slower, the room darker. But I didn't speak, because in my town, when the pastor said God was in the room, you bowed your head, even when everything inside you was screaming to run. There's a strange thing that happens when something bad repeats itself often enough. It stops feeling bad, not all at once, not like flipping a switch, but like a candle slowly burning out, 1 inch of wick at a time. I don't remember when I stopped flinching at the sound of the sanctuary door locking. I don't remember when I stopped looking for excuses to leave early. What I remember is this: the light in that room began to feel too bright, and the darkness, it felt easier, safer, because in the dark I didn't have to see his face, or the gold ring he wore when he whispered verses I never saw in any real Bible. By the time I was 14, Pastor Elroy no longer waited until the end of service. He started calling me to his office during the week, always under the same reason: discipleship. Sometimes Mama even drove me there herself. "Pastor Elroy says you've got calling," she'd smile. "Don't disappoint the Lord." I never told her that the calling felt more like a cage, that in his office the blinds were always drawn, that the couch was too soft and the air too still, that he prayed in a voice that trembled only when he got too close. He never used threats, never raised a hand, only used scripture. Manipulation dressed in verses like poison in a teacup. He told me Eve was deceived because she questioned too much. He said Mary was blessed because she yielded. So I yielded, again and again, until yielding became habit and silence became identity. The more it happened, the more I forgot who I had been before. There was a girl who used to sing loudly in the choir, always a little off-key but joyful. She stopped singing. There was a girl who asked questions in Bible class. She stopped raising her hand. There was a girl who used to dream of being a teacher. She stopped dreaming. By 15, I was a shadow. The only place I felt truly alive was in the sewing room at home. With a needle in my hand and fabric under my fingers, I could create something, make it straight, fix what was crooked. That year, I stitched the Easter robes for the children's choir. Pastor Elroy said they looked anointed. Said, I looked anointed. He brushed my hair back from my face when he said it. I said, thank you. Because I didn't know what else to say, and because by then, the darkness didn't feel strange anymore. It felt normal. And that's the most dangerous kind of darkness there is. I hadn't eaten much that morning, just a dry biscuit and a sip of sweet tea. My stomach was tight all the time back then, like it was clenched around something I couldn't name. Food didn't sit well, sleep didn't come easy. But I still went to church, like always. It was Palm Sunday, and the sanctuary was full. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and the children waved palm branches, shouting, Hosanna, as they walked down the aisle. I sat in the front row, my new shoes pinching my toes, the dove pin still hidden beneath my collar. Pastor Elroy was preaching on sacrifice. He said God requires the innocent to trust, even when they don't understand. He looked at me while he said it. That's when the heat rushed up my spine. My ears rang. My hands went clammy. And then, nothing. Just black. When I woke up, I was on the floor, surrounded by faces. Mama fanned me with a bulletin. Daddy held a cold cloth to my neck. Pastor Elroy stood over me, calm as ever. She's fasting, he said softly. The Spirit is working in her. No one questioned it. They praised me, said I was holy. That's what I remember most. Not the concern, but the admiration. The next day, Mama told the ladies at the sewing circle I had a spiritual spell. They nodded, like it was a badge of honor. But inside I felt hollow, because fainting wasn't holy. It was exhaustion. It was fear bottled up for too long. That night, alone in my room, I looked at the pin again, that little gold dove, and for the first time, I wanted to throw it out the window, but I didn't, because even though I knew something was wrong, I didn't know how to call it wrong, not when the whole church called it blessed, not when I was praised for collapsing under the weight of someone else's holiness. I told Mama I didn't want to go to Wednesday prayer anymore. She frowned. You're too young to choose. I wasn't. But in that house, under that roof, with that church, my voice didn't matter yet. So I went back. Because that's what girls like me did. We went back, until we forgot there was ever another option. Her name was Lillian Elroy. Everyone called her First Lady. She wore wide-brimmed hats with satin bands and gloves that matched her purse. She walked like royalty, and no one questioned her authority. Not in the kitchen, not in the pews, and certainly not in the parsonage. When I was 16, she invited me over, said she needed help with folding bulletins and preparing the tea cakes for the women's meeting. Mama was thrilled. Look at you, child, she beamed. You're practically part of their family now. I didn't want to go, but no one says no to the First Lady. The parsonage was spotless, too quiet. Pastor Elroy wasn't home, or so I thought. We folded papers at the dining table. Lillian complimented my hands. You move like a girl with grace, she said. I nodded, but I kept my eyes down. I couldn't meet hers. She poured tea, offered me one of the cakes. You don't eat much, do you? I try, I said. She leaned in slightly. He prays a lot with you. It wasn't a question. I froze. Yes, ma'am, I whispered. She looked at me then, not with warmth, not even with suspicion, with resignation. like she'd seen this story play out before and had decided long ago to let it be. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small sachet. Lavender. "For your dresser drawer," she said, handing it to me. "Keeps things fresh." And just like that, the conversation ended. No concern, no questions, no help. Only an unspoken agreement. I won't ask, and you won't tell. That day changed me. Because until then, I thought maybe she didn't know. Maybe if someone told her, she'd put a stop to it. But now I understood. She chose not to see it. Because looking might mean losing everything. Her home, her status, her control. And women like her, they learn to survive by keeping things in their place. Even girls, even me. I left the parsonage with lavender in my hand and bitterness in my chest. It was the first time I understood how silence can be passed from woman to woman, like a family recipe or an old scarf. And it's just as suffocating. I was 17 when he baptized me. Late for my age, some would say. But Pastor Elroy insisted that baptism was only meaningful when the Spirit truly settles. And in his words, my time had come. I didn't feel holy, I felt hollow. But I nodded anyway. The church cheered when he announced it. Mama wept with joy. "You'll be washed clean," she whispered. But I wasn't dirty, I was tired. The ceremony was planned for a Sunday evening after the second service, when the room would be dimmer, quieter, more intimate, he said. He wore white robes, spotless, flowing. I wore a plain white dress, borrowed from the church closet. It clung to me in the worst places once it got wet. The water was cold, the pool shallow. He guided me in with one hand on my back, the other under my arm. His grip was too tight, his smile too fixed. "You are reborn," he said, "into obedience and light." He dipped me under. And for a moment, a full, suspended moment, I didn't want to come back up. Not because I feared drowning, but because it felt easier than living with everything I couldn't name. When he pulled me back. Up, the room spun. My dress clung. His hand lingered. The congregation clapped, but I couldn't hear them. All I heard was the rush of blood in my ears. All I felt was shame. Later that night, I found myself scrubbing the skin on my arms raw, as if I could erase the weight of his touch. I didn't sleep. Mama beamed the next morning, telling neighbors how pure I looked, how close to the Lord I must be. But I didn't feel closer to God. I felt buried, like the baptism had sealed something inside. Me instead of setting me free. The worst part? I still prayed. I still whispered, "God, please tell me this is what you want." Because when a man of God does something long enough, in enough light, with enough verses, you start to wonder if maybe you're the one who misunderstood the word. But deep down, in a place even he couldn't touch, I knew. God doesn't use fear to sanctify. Only men do that. It was a Tuesday when I first stepped into the small storefront church across town. No stained glass, no choir, no fancy hats or polished shoes, just metal chairs, folding tables, and voices that sang off-key, but with fire. I had told Mama I was going to the sewing supply store. Instead, I went to a service where no one knew my name. The pastor was a woman, something I'd never seen before. Her voice cracked when she preached, and her sermon was messy, unscripted, full of pauses. But it felt real. She didn't quote obedience. She talked about survival, talked about how God isn't just in the pulpit. He's in the breaking, in the leaving, in the no more. I sat in the back, hoping no one would ask my name. No one did. For an hour, I felt like I belonged to myself again. When I got home, I tucked the tiny bulletin from that church into the back of my Bible. Behind the pages, I never read anymore. That Sunday, I told Mama I didn't feel well and skipped service. She frowned, but she let me stay. That morning was quiet. I made tea. I stitched a small cloth. And I breathed, really breathed. But peace never lasts long when silence holds secrets. On Wednesday, Pastor Elroy showed up at our door. Mama let him in, beaming as usual. He sat on the edge of our worn couch and said, "Mavis, I missed your presence this week." I didn't respond. He leaned forward. "I hope you're not being led astray. God has a plan for your life, and I've been placed to shepherd it." I didn't look at him. That's when his tone changed, just slightly. He said, "Not all girls are ready for spiritual maturity. Some walk away when the fire gets hot, but we both know you're not a quitter." I said nothing, because I knew what he was really saying. Don't run, I still have power. Mama brought out sweet tea and smiled. "Isn't she lucky to have such attention, Pastor?" He smiled back, but his eyes never left mine. When he left, Mama said, "You should apologize. I know you didn't mean to hurt his feelings." I nodded, because arguing would have meant revealing what no one was ready to hear. But that night, I did something new. I took the dove pin and buried it at the base of the oak tree behind our house. I didn't tell anyone, but I stood there for a long time, pressing dirt over metal, whispering, "You don't own me anymore." It was the first time I tried to leave, not just the church, but the grip it had on my voice. It happened on a Friday. There was a revival at the church, one of those week-long services where visiting pastors come in from out of town. The music gets louder, and the people shout longer. Mama insisted I help in the kitchen, even though I begged to stay home. "You've been distant lately," she said. "Go let the Lord use you." So I went. But I avoided him all evening. I stayed in the back, refilling cups, folding napkins, scrubbing pans that were already clean. Anything to stay busy, anything to avoid his eyes. But Pastor Elroy always noticed when he wasn't the center of someone's world. As people were leaving, he caught me at the edge of the hallway near the choir robes. He smiled, but it was thinner than usual, tighter. "You've been cold lately," he said. I said nothing. He leaned closer, his breath tinged with coffee. "Is there another voice guiding you, Mavis?" I swallowed hard. Then I said, just barely above a whisper, "I don't want to pray with you anymore." The words hung there, sharp and naked. He blinked. For the first time, he didn't have a verse ready. Then his jaw clenched. "You're confused," he said. "You've let the enemy in." I took a step back. He reached for my arm, and I pulled away. Not dramatically, not loud, just firm. "No," I said. That one word held 17 years of buried fire. He didn't shout. He didn't strike me. But he looked at me with something darker than disappointment, contempt. "You'll regret this," he hissed. I walked past him without another word, and I didn't look back. But inside me, everything shook. That night, I cried harder than I ever had. Not just from fear, but from relief, because I had broken the spell. The next Sunday, I didn't go to church, or the one after that. Mama fussed, Daddy stayed quiet, neighbors asked questions. But I stayed home. I started attending the small storefront church across town again, quietly. No more pins, no more secrets. For weeks, I waited for Elroy to confront me again. He didn't. Instead, he did something worse. He preached about betrayal, about rebellion, about Jezebels who rise up against God's appointed. Everyone in that church looked at me differently after that, even the ones who claimed to love me. I had refused him, and in his world, that made me dangerous. That's when I learned. Abusers don't always lash out. Sometimes they just let you bleed alone. It started slow, as gossip always does. A side glance here, a shortened wave there, a half-finished sentence when I walked into the corner store. But then it reached my porch. Sister Geraldine was the first to say it outright. She came by with a lemon pie. Like she used to, her lipstick fresh and her heels too high for someone her age. She set the pie down, smoothed her skirt, and said, "Mavis, I don't know what you said to that man, but you need to be careful with your tone." I blinked. "What man?" She gave me a long look. "You know what man." And then she leaned in, not to comfort, but to threaten in disguise. "Your mama's proud of you. Don't make her ashamed now." She left without eating a slice. That week, more women showed up. Some pretending to check on me, others more bold. One asked if I was feeling rebellious. Another asked if I'd fallen into temptation. But the worst came from Miss Laverne, the organist, the woman who used to pinch my cheeks when I sang off key. She said, "You know, men of God carry heavy burdens. Sometimes they stumble. It's our job to cover them, not expose them." Cover. Like a crime scene, like a wound, like a coffin. That word sat in my chest like a stone. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded politely and watched her leave. After that, the whispers turned sharp. Some said I had made it all up. Others said I had tempted him. One woman, Sister Bonnie, who once helped deliver my cousin's baby, said I was never quite right since the fainting spell. Mama heard the rumors, but never asked me directly. She just got quieter. Stopped humming while she cooked. Stopped asking where I was going. One evening I heard her crying in her bedroom. Just for a moment. Then it was gone. I wanted to believe she didn't know. But some truths are too loud to ignore. I wrote a letter to the storefront pastor. Told her I needed help. Not just prayers, but direction. She invited me to speak with her privately. I told her everything. It was the first time I said the words out loud. The whole truth. The kind that doesn't sound like fiction, but still feels unreal coming from your own mouth. She didn't flinch. She didn't ask, "Why now?" She said, "You're not the first girl to walk through that fire, but you might be the first one to drag it into the light." And I wept. Not because of pain, but because someone finally believed me without needing proof. The gossip had reached my door. But now, so had Grace. She waited until the biscuits were out of the oven. The air smelled like butter and anxiety, and the kitchen was too quiet. Usually she hummed or clicked her teeth in rhythm with the ticking wall clock. Not that night. She poured sweet tea into 2 mismatched glasses and set one in front of me. Her hands trembled, just slightly, not enough to name, but enough to notice. Then she sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and said, "Mavis, what happened?" 3 words, not angry, not accusatory, just tired. I stared at the steam rising from the biscuits. I felt 13 again. 17. Every version of myself that had kept her mouth shut at that table. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't have to. I took a breath that felt like I'd been holding it for decades. And I said, "He touched me." Her eyes blinked slow. Her jaw set, but she didn't interrupt. "He said it was spiritual, said I was chosen, but Mama, it wasn't prayer." Her hands, still folded, twitched. "Was it just once?" she asked. "No." Silence. Then she stood up, opened the drawer, pulled out a cloth, began wiping a counter that didn't need cleaning. I waited. She said, "People don't take kindly to words like that. Not about men like him." "I know." She turned around. Her eyes were glossy but dry. "I failed you." The words hit harder than anything Elroy had ever said. "No, Mama," I whispered. "You didn't know." She shook her head. "I should have. A mother's supposed to know." We sat there for a long time. She didn't ask for more details. I didn't offer. That night, she made up the guest bed for me. Kissed my forehead before I went to sleep, something she hadn't done since I was a girl. I don't know if she ever truly forgave herself, but she believed me. And that was more than I ever expected. The next Sunday, Mama didn't go to church. She told the neighbors she had a headache, but I knew it was something deeper. Shame is heavy when it turns to dust and settles on the people you thought would protect you. But her silence this time wasn't to hide me. It was to stand beside me. And in her own quiet way, she finally chose me over the pulpit. It started as therapy. The storefront pastor had given me a worn notebook and said, "Write it all down, not for them, for you." At first, I didn't know where to begin. The memories came out crooked, out of order. Sometimes I couldn't tell if it was something I remembered, something I dreamed, or something I had buried too deep to name. But I wrote. At night, by the light of a small lamp in my room, I wrote every word I never spoke, every prayer that was a scream in disguise, every moment I wanted to vanish inside that sanctuary and never come back out. One day I wrote a letter, not to God, not to myself, but to Him. Dear Pastor Elroy, you taught me scripture while you broke me. You said obedience was holy. You meant silence was convenient. You took God's name and wrapped it around your hands like rope, and I wore it like a noose. But I survived you, and I will not die with your voice in my mouth. I never meant to send it, but I sealed it anyway. Weeks passed. I kept the letter tucked in my Bible, behind the bulletin from the storefront church. I didn't look at it, didn't open it. Then one afternoon, while walking past the post office, I paused. Something in my chest said, "You don't owe him anything." But something deeper said, "You owe yourself the right to stop whispering." So I mailed it. No return address, no signature, just the truth. A piece of paper that weighed less than an ounce but carried decades of weight. That night I slept 8 full hours, the first time in years. I don't know if he ever opened it. I don't know if he recognized the handwriting. But I do know this. I never saw him. At the market again. He stopped showing up at town meetings, retired early from the church, moved away without fanfare. Some said he had health issues. Others said he went to care for a cousin upstate. But I didn't care where he went. I just cared that he was gone. And for the first time, when I walked past that church building, I didn't flinch. Because I knew the real sanctuary wasn't in the walls where I was broken. It was in the words I had the courage to send. Her name was Eunice. She sat 2 rows behind me at the storefront church. Small, silver-haired, always wore a cardigan even in summer. I had seen her week after week, nodding quietly during the sermons, her hands folded like she was holding something invisible. One Sunday after service, as I gathered my purse, she tapped my shoulder. "You got a second, Mavis?" she asked. We sat on the worn bench outside the building. The sun was bright, but she stayed in the shade. Her voice was slow, deliberate. "I heard about you," she said. "I know the courage it takes to stay sitting in that pew after what they did." I looked at her, unsure of what she meant. She didn't blink. "I had a preacher too," she continued. "Different town, same sermon." I froze. She nodded. "I was 15. He said I was favored, said the Lord had plans for me. I carried that lie in my belly for 50 years. Then she reached into her Bible and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the letter I wrote but never sent." She placed it in my hand, and for a moment I felt seen in a way even prayer couldn't offer. We sat there, the 2 of us, old women with young wounds, saying nothing. But we didn't need to. Sometimes healing doesn't come in words. It comes in the knowing. After that day, we started meeting every Thursday. Just us. No titles, no church clothes, no masks. We brought tea, old photos. Laughter that started as whispers and grew louder with each passing week. We shared stories, not just of pain, but of survival. She told me how she once ran away and slept in a barn just to avoid Sunday service. I told her about the day I buried the dove pin. She said, "That was your funeral." I said, "No, that was my resurrection." We both laughed until we cried. One afternoon, she brought me a notebook, brand new, with floral print on the cover. Write it all down again, she said, but this time for others. At first I hesitated, but then I remembered what she gave me with her own letter. Permission to be wounded, to be wise, to be whole. That night I opened to the first page and wrote, "This is not just my story. It is the story of every woman who was taught silence in the name of God. Her name is Camille, 22, bright, sharp-tongued and soft-hearted, the kind of girl who wears her natural hair like a crown and corrects people when they mispronounce her name. She's everything I never dared to be at her age. Camille visits me every other Sunday, usually with groceries I didn't ask for and questions I didn't prepare to answer. That day, she sat on the floor of my living room, sorting through a box of old church programs I had kept for no good reason. "Grandma, you were in all these committees?" she asked, holding up a yellowed bulletin. I nodded. Back then, that's how women stayed involved. She smiled. "You were the backbone of the place, huh?" I swallowed hard, and then I said it. "I left that church for a reason, Camille." She looked up. "Why?" I didn't rush. I told her slowly. Not every detail, not yet, just enough. Enough to let her know the man everyone used to praise had done things no man of God should do. Enough for her to understand that silence isn't holy. It's heavy. She didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, her eyes were glassy. She reached for my hand and said, "Thank you for telling me." I waited for the questions. They didn't come. Instead, she said, "Can I tell others? Not names, just the truth?" And I nodded, because that's the thing about truth. Once you speak it, it stops belonging only to you. That night, she posted a message online, something about how generations of women carry wounds that don't show on X-rays, how listening is an act of love, how silence isn't strength, and neither is pretending. Hundreds of people shared it. Dozens sent messages to her. Some said, "This sounds like my mother." Others said, "This is my story." Camille came back the next weekend with a notebook. "I want to write it all down," she said. The real stories, yours, Auntie Eunice's, others. I told her she could, and I added one more thing. "Don't clean it up." She laughed. "I wouldn't dare." That day, I realized something sacred. What broke me in silence was being rebuilt in voice, not just mine, but hers. And maybe, one day, her daughter's too. It happened quietly, the way things die when no one is watching. The church where Pastor Elroy once preached stood tall for years, even after he left, even after the whispers faded. New faces came. New preachers filled the pulpit. The same pews, same stained glass, same hymns echoing through decades. But something had shifted. People left, slowly, then all at once. First the young folks, then the choir, then Sister Geraldine's family, who once boasted 5 generations on the same row. By the time the pandemic came, the building was already empty most Sundays. And one morning, a city notice was posted on the door. Property pending redevelopment. I walked past it a few weeks later. Grass overgrown. Windows dusty. The old wooden cross still clinging to the bricks above the entrance like it didn't know its time had passed. I stood there staring at that door, the one he once closed behind me. The one I never dared speak of until I was nearly 80. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't angry either. I was still. I whispered a quiet prayer, not for vengeance, not for shame, but for release. For every girl who sat in those pews and learned the wrong lessons about love. For every woman who stayed too long because God's name was used like a chain. And for me, the girl I had been, the woman I had become, the elder I now am. I turned away and walked home, not looking back. Because healing doesn't live in stained glass. It lives in truth. And mine was no longer chained to that building. That door had closed. but mine had opened. I used to think healing had a deadline, that if I didn't speak by 30 or 40 or 50, then silence had won. That the truth, if buried too long, would rot like forgotten fruit. But here I am, 82 years old, and the truth still tastes fresh on my tongue. I remember a woman once said, "You're too old to bring that up now." She meant well, meant I should protect my peace, protect my reputation. But the truth doesn't expire. It grows. It waits. And when it's ready, when you're ready, it returns, gentle but firm, like the tide reclaiming the shore. I speak now not because I need revenge, but because silence no longer serves me. I speak because there are girls sitting in pews right now, feeling confused, feeling afraid, watching hands that should be holy turn harmful. I speak because no one did for me. I used to dream of justice, a public reckoning, maybe even handcuffs. But now, justice looks like telling my granddaughter the truth and seeing her eyes light up with fury and love. Justice is a circle of women at the storefront church, passing around tissues and stories like they're sacred offerings. Justice is walking past the church that hurt me without flinching. Justice is peace, hard-earned, heavy-lifted, holy peace. I will never be the girl I was before he touched me. But I am not broken. I am not ruined. I am not weak. I am a survivor. I am a witness. And now, finally, I am a voice. If this story touched you, if you've ever carried a secret that felt too heavy, too old, too deep, know this: your truth matters. There is no clock on healing. There is no shame in speaking. And there is no such thing as too late. Drop your city in the comments. Let Mavis know she's not alone. Share your story or simply leave a heart if her voice reached you. Like this video if you believe every woman deserves to be heard. Subscribe to this channel for more untold truths, because silence is no longer an option. Thank you for listening to her truth. Now, it's time to honor yours.